Hi, Mike. Thank you for all that you do and for your talks today. I am a theoretical physicist who preaches at an evangelical church. So
Yeah.
I appreciate this system of looking at the world. But the thing that I found most useful about it is the way that it allows us to tailor our communication to different levels and different layers or different aspects of the spiral. And so much of the stuff we've heard today has been these enormous numbers of asylum seekers or refugees in the world, statistics and data, and that's my wheelhouse. But what's not my wheelhouse is how to communicate that effectively. So in terms of communication and even the way that our brains sort of interpret these things, what's your advice on how to express these things through metaphor or story that we can communicate effectively to all layers in the spiral?
Yeah, I'm a real heady kind of person. And then I realized one day that no matter how many facts and figures I had, nobody cared. And that if instead I spoke from a position of how I've hurt and what stood in my way and how I eventually overcame it, I created a story structure and people cared. And then if I bake the data into that structure, people pay attention. And so if you listen to me, so there's a green-orange energy to my work, but everybody all the way down to purple kind of hangs out as I do what I do. Can we get the spiral back up? So like if you listen to me talk about my story and trying to, so the point of my book is to not like convince people to think about God like I do, but to show them how to interrogate their own beliefs, especially if they're currently dissatisfied in some way. And so I actually bake the whole spiral into the narrative of my book because I was so hurt and so afraid and bullied, right? But I had a place of community that I lived in the church, and I lost my community, which is terrifying to purple. But as soon as I talk about loss of community in the book, I tease that I could find it again, which purple, now they're hooked. They stay, right? So, and then I talk about how I kind of gained the courage to ask questions against the community pressure that I always faced. And then I talk about how much I love the Bible and how much it meant to me. And the Bible is important, the Bible. But there were some things that didn't add up. And by the way, cosmology is awesome, right? And then I learned that there's this broad tradition that includes secularism and Christian spirituality that has valid perspectives about the world. And what did I do? Right in there, adding facts and figures for every group, I hit the need points of the entire spiral, and that's how I hold a room that has conservative evangelicals and atheists and everything in between. As I talk, I intentionally throw everybody a bone. So even when the next bone hits them on the forehead, they're like, ow! Then I throw them another one, right? So you don't lose the room. That's what's so powerful about spiral dynamics as communications. You understand that really one group is persuaded by data. One. And even they're persuaded by data for emotional reasons. They need certainty. They're interrogating their past, right? So it's not just enough to talk about emotion. It's not enough to be emotional. It's to do so with intention to draw in as many people to a narrative as possible. By the way, a beautiful thing about story is the only time you get out of your perspective. When you're engrossed in a story with a protagonist, you take on their viewpoint, and studies have shown that if the protagonist of a story learns something as you hear it, within a couple of weeks, you'll believe you learned that and you'll forget that it was via a story. Whereas if I just came up this morning and gave you a list of facts and figures about prayer, you would be invited to what? Rationally interrogate them and hold them at a distance and evaluate. But as soon as I say weepy, weepy, weepy nose on the floor thing, oh, and here's the sad thing. I'm not actually a Machiavellian puppeteer up here acting. What I do is knowing that it will help people is I dig as far into my own psyche and pull up real emotion that I offer to you all as a sacrifice so that you can get the facts and figures and find healing in your own life. And part of that is not just having the facts and figures, is doing a lot of therapy, and it's learning to accept yourself. Because unless you have really embodied the idea that as messed up as you are, you still love you, you can't be vulnerable in front of a group of people because you can't be vulnerable alone. And so part of, I think, doing the work of communication and social change is doing the self-development work to accept yourself fully so that you don't really care if other people do or not. And that creates a bizarre energy in the room, at least in my experience. But what do I know? I'm a college dropout.
Okay, there's a question up the back there. James, could you run a little bit faster with the mic?
Could you talk about the applications to conflict resolution from this model?
Yes, absolutely. So do you see these colors up here we didn't talk about? That's the theoretical second tier of spiral dynamics. The theory is at this tier, you're an echo of beige because you feel vulnerable, because you've kind of figured that's all happening. And once you figured out this was all happening, you realize if you spoke to people's values at different value memes, you can basically get them to do whatever you want them to do. And you realize if they figure that out, they'll kill you. So you get afraid and you hide just like beige and you manipulate the system to your advantage. And then, and again, this is theoretical, this all has pretty good science. Some of it dated, some of it not. Up here, super hypothetical. At some point, you realize you're not the only one. You start organizing together to try to create social good. How do you do that using this model? You speak to people's value. You speak to their fear, and you speak to what is good and what is right. So if we look at what these people are looking for in a church context, for example, beige literally wants food and is almost never allowed in church because of it. Beige smells funny. Beige doesn't follow social norms. So the church tends to hold beige at arm's length, and they're not involved in church conflict because they're not allowed into the temple in the first place. If they show up, we say, hey, we have a homeless ministry. It's down the street. But it's not here where we take the sacred meal. What does purple want? Purple wants to know that we're honoring our ancestors as our identity. So how do you invite purple into work? You expand the notion of the tribe, right? So early tribal identity in purple is based on birth and blood. That's how you find role in society. As things move forward, we learn that belonging can be based on what you believe. This was an innovation in Christian theology. No, it's okay, Romans. You can be Christian too if you just believe the right things. And then as society develops, it becomes based on behavior. Millennials don't care what you believe, they care what you do, right? So if you believe God is love, but you oppress people, millennials, you don't belong here, or more accurately, I don't belong with you vis-a-vis empty pews, right? So with purple, you expand the notion of tribe to include more people to say that by doing this, we honor our ancestors and our story or our tradition. Red, how do you get red involved? Red is on the trustee board. Red is an elder. Red wants everyone to know, especially the pastor, that they are in charge. And red is really easy to trick with a cape. And the cape is, only you can help with this problem. Only you are powerful enough and strong enough and smart enough to deal with the bins or whatever it is. And then red is in because you held the we're not strong enough, save us cape up to red. They charge every time. What does blue care about? We're doing this for the gospel. We're doing this for the biblical story. We're doing this for Christ. Literally say anything that's not obviously non-biblical and put for the gospel at the end, and blue is all in. Every time. We're doing this because the Bible says, turn in your Bibles to, and blue is like, yes, yes. Orange, here's the statistics of the problem. Here's the science-based solution. Check. Takes the most homework, it's the shortest presentation. Green, we are going to free the oppressed. We are going to take the people from the margins and liberate them. And green is in. So the problem is they tend to talk past each other. So your job in conflict resolution is to be the translator, is to show how what you're talking about, oh, you know what? So you're talking about our identity and you're talking about the merit. Here's the intersection of those things. And that's when people start hearing each other. So I was doing an Ask Science Mike Live event right after the election in Seattle, Washington. And an amazing thing happened. Someone stood up and said, hey, Science Mike, I voted for Donald Trump. I was like, you're at one of my events? And then it turns out like 30 or 35% of my audience voted for Donald Trump. Knocked me over with a feather, right? So he stands up and he describes why he thinks it's not only civil, but necessary as a Christian to support Donald Trump. Okay, thank you. Immediately after he does what he does, before I even really answer his question, another person stands up and she says, hi, I'm a black lesbian, and everything he just said is a direct threat to my existence. We're all in the room together. So what can I do? Like this room's about to tear itself apart. For the first time ever, I feel like I've lost the room. So I dig deep into my own vulnerability. And I talk about growing up in the rural South. And I talk about the racism I've encountered in my own heart. And I talk about my background being people who were once European, who erased all of our ethnicity to become white in a big compromise to gain status in society. And I talk about my own experiences as a Southern Baptist telling a dear friend who was gay that if he didn't change his life, he would spend eternity in hell. And I just, confession. So what did I do? I made myself the king of all sinners in the room. I said, guess what? No matter how bad you think any of those people are, I'm worse. By no matter what value system you're using, I'm the worst in everyone's value system. So I started a story of transformation, right? So what happens at the end of that? The Trump voters were all crying, right? Because I didn't stand up and tell them they were wrong. I stood up and said, I was worse than anybody thought they were. And that I'm not an expert and I'm not an authority. I'm just a person trying to figure out how to make every person feel like they are known and loved by God. And in a room that's Christian and post-Christian, that's a piece of yarn that circled around the entire room. Now, is there some stuff that didn't get solved there? Yeah. But it was one of the few moments I've known in America since November the 8th of the last year where people from that radically different viewpoints could share space and have a discussion. And I watched an amazing conversation happen between two people that couldn't have happened otherwise unless I stepped in as a V-meme translator.
Okay, we've got probably one more question down the back or up the back.
Hey, I was just thinking there when you started talking about the different types of competitiveness in the different colors. Where do you think mental health issues and more particularly like self-worth issues come into it? Do you think it's something that's before the spectrum and it's integrated in the whole thing? Or do you think it's something that's actually came from how each color is interacting with each other?
Yeah, so mental health can exist at any level of the spiral. Mental health issues. Every V-meme can be healthy or unhealthy. Being forced or stunted in your development can create mental health issues. Being perpetually immersed in a mismatch between these two sides of the helix can cause solvable or curable mental health issues. But the primary application of spiral dynamics is a social context, using the individual as an example. It's not actually meant to be a diagnostic or corrective tool for individual psychology. I think there's much better models for that than spiral dynamics.
We can do one quick question.
This may be slightly unrelated, but I'm just very curious what your favorite book is, or if there's a piece of literature or work that you would recommend or feel like every human should read before they die.
Oh my gosh.
That's not a science question.
I mean, I read 6 to 8 a month. I was absolutely about to make a Finding God in the Waves joke, so thanks for doing that for me. By the way, findinggodinthewaves.com. Honestly, one I think everyone should read. It's available online. It's free. It's short. It's called The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. And it is...
Peter, you had a question up the back. Do you want to ask it really quickly?
My answers have accelerated, so I'm throwing off their pacing.
How you doing? Just want to say first, thank you for your work and for... Sorry, should I go here? Or?
No, you're fine. I just wanted to see your face.
And for messing with my head for the last 2 years with your lovely baritone voice. But I just want to know, I do a lot of work with churches across denominations, stuff like that, and I can see and relate to the guy who talked earlier with a lot of hurt that has been caused. How do we bring this, instead of just a lot of people just walking away and trying to find something else, how do we bring this transformation into existing churches and existing systems, or how do we transform?
You cannot lead people where they don't want to go. Some churches have to die, but that's okay. They're churches, and churches are in the resurrection business. Sometimes the only way Christianity can pull its head out of its collective ass is to die. It's happened over and over in history, and yet in some way the story of this man, Jesus, continues. And that's the way we adapt to new times. So, individually, many people find themselves in some way in love with or fascinated by Jesus Christ. And on the outsides of church community, we have a church in exile. Congratulations. The entire Bible is about exile. The whole thing, beginning to end, is the story of people of faith in exile from community and exile with God. The Bible has tremendous solidarity to offer theologically displaced people. Thank you. I was going to drop the mic myself. So what do? We build tabernacles in the wilderness. We gather together with other people similarly brokenhearted who lie down by the waters of Babylon and weep for Zion. We offer each other what we have: food, water, safety, shelter, solidarity, a listening ear, an appropriate hug that's never sexually predatory. It's a joke, but it's not, folks. And we go about the work of wandering in the wilderness until we find our way home. It's hard. Losing the church of my childhood is the hardest thing I've ever done. There's people in my home city who say my name like a curse word because I've gone against the sacred text. I can't lead them anywhere. To them, I'm the problem. So I sit outside the city gates with the other lepers, and I tell them, I hurt too, but I love you, and we're going to be okay, because there is a way back to Zion. And sure enough, when churches see enough fall away, the next thing you see is the city gates open wide. I've been invited into the highest level of denominational leadership, publicly or in secret, of almost every Christian denomination in the West. Because there's so much terror about death. There's so much terror of what happens on Friday. So in exile, our job is to make it until Saturday, to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn, and then to do the most improbable thing possible, to rise again with Christ on Sunday. And how do we do that? We love God with all that we have, even if we're not quite sure who God is. And we love our neighbor as ourselves in the same way that the Good Samaritan did. To be present with one broken on the side of the road who has been passed by the religious and government elite, and we pour oil and wine on their wounds and say, I will not leave you.
That is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you again, Mike.